present the steering board of the Worth Partnership project. I think the best way will be for everyone to introduce themselves. I just want to give sort of a framework of the conversation that we are going to be having now. I kindly ask to keep any questions that you might have towards the end. So we are going to today be discussing on how design can add value and differentiate products in the lifestyle sectors. We've heard also from this morning what the creative and cultural industries are, how they function, the value that they offer, which is both in terms of economical value, but also a very strong point of creative and cultural industries is the non-monetary value, which has to do with culture, which has to do with facilitating innovation, facilitating the change of behaviors, and also finding common grounds through crossovers and also spillovers, as Silvia Draghi was also mentioning. So today is going to be an informal conversation, hopefully touching all of the points, some from the design perspective, some from the technology perspective, others still from social and environmental perspectives. So I kindly ask the steering board members to say their name and introduce themselves a little bit. So Manuela, you could start.
Hello, I'm Manuela Navot from Linz in Austria. I'm heading the department of Ars Electronica Export. I'm curator at Ars Electronica, and I'm also a guest professor at the university, at the Art University in Linz, on the Department of Interface Culture.
Hi, my name is Kolbrún Ýr Gunnarsdóttir, and I'm from Iceland. I am a fashion and accessories or jewelry designer. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you. My name is Wolfgang Wagner. I'm founder and owner of MSW Tech. I'm one of the technology guys. I do printed electronics, thin, flexible, new shape of electronics. I'm also the general chair of LOPEC, which tries to bring this technology to market. And I'm seeing a lot of efforts needed to bring design and technology together to make successful products. That's the reason why I'm here.
Hi, my name is Pirjo Kääriäinen. I work as a professor of design-driven fiber innovations in Helsinki, Aalto University in Finland. I'm working in the intersection of chemical engineering and design, but my background is in textile design and textile industry, where I used to work as a design manager already quite a long time ago. So I just love, or my passion is also this intersection of how to embed design in science also.
Hello, my name is Natsai Audrey Chiesa. I am from London and I'm the founder of Faber Futures. Faber Futures is a biodesign agency and we are leveraging design thinking with biotechnology for sustainable futures. My background is architecture and material futures. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sebastian Thies from Munich. I'm 6th generation footwear designer since 1856. We have some own footwear brands and we work for other companies too.
Hello, I'm Kendall Robbins. I am Senior Programme Manager for the British Council's Architecture, Design and Fashion team. The British Council is the UK's cultural and educational organisation, and so we use the design disciplines within my team to facilitate cultural dialogue with the UK and the 115 countries where we work. I'm also responsible for our programmes specifically in craft and sustainable fashion.
Hey, I'm Asad Awad. I live between Beirut and Madrid. I'm an accessory designer and actually doing a new department, a master degree in accessories and wearables, so joining the artisanal part with the technological part.
Hi, my name is Zoe Broach. I'm head of fashion from the Royal College of Art and co-founder and designer of label Boudica.
Hi, I'm Julia Körner and I'm a designer with a background in architecture. And I have a label called JK Design, which is based in Austria. And also in Los Angeles, where I'm assistant adjunct professor at UCLA teaching in the architecture department. And I'm specialized in 3D printing in fashion. And my most recent work is for the Black Panther, the costumes, which just won an Oscar.
Good afternoon, my name is Wolfgang Wagner. I'm working for Swarovski. We are based in Austria. We are quite young compared to yours. It's 1895. I'm working in the department where we try to push disruptive technologies, new production technologies. And we just founded an internal startup trying to push one topic where we collaborated together with Julia. Maybe some of you also saw some of the first results within an artistic project. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Pavel Ivančič. I'm from Prague, Czech Republic. I am fashion designer, curator and professor at the Academy of Arts and Architecture in Prague.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all very much. So let's start with design, since a lot of designers are present here. So the question goes to Pavel, but then anybody else who would like to also intervene, of course, is very welcome. So how are design-oriented actions changing small businesses, or how can they change and bring positive change in small businesses today?
Well, I believe it's essential because design is something that is enabling companies to meet the lifestyle needs of their target customers, and to, give the content appropriate and relevant form.
And do you also think that there is a lot of interaction with the customers through design-driven actions?
Well, definitely, because there is necessary the feedback from the customers, so you can proceed.
Does anybody else would like to add something? No? Okay. Still on the topic of designers, and my question goes out to Kolbrun and to Sebastian. Why do you think it is important for designers to be part of a global design-driven movement, if such a movement exists? And why do you think it's important to get stronger influence on today's design world from the designer themselves?
Well, I think it's, from my point of view, since I'm an environmental enthusiast, I think it's very important to have a movement that is like thinking about global warming and all the fast fashion industries and how we can change the consumer habits. So I think that it's very important for us as designers to be aware of it all and make it our duty to follow up with these kind of movements. The movements like Fashion Revolution, for example, they have made so much content for us to use and so easy for us to access and to make a higher voice for all the designers and also for the normal consumer that needs this information from us, if you know what I mean.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to me there are only two directions where design is going globally. So one is cost efficiency, which is also matter in the design, but it's nothing really for me which is important to achieve, because the big companies are very good at that. But the other movement is sustainability, and real sustainability you can only achieve if you collaborate with others. And maybe it's not really important that two footwear designers work together, but it's important as a footwear designer to work with material designers, to work maybe with tech companies. And the most important thing to my mind in sustainability and design and sustainability is to listen to the opinion of others, because there is simply not one answer and everybody has a different opinion. And a lot of people are focusing on vegan products, which are mostly oil-based or made from plastics. And isn't it better to use glass bottles instead of plastic bottles? Then you don't have to recycle all the plastic. But on the other hand, you have to do something with the existing materials. So if you don't take all these opinions into consideration, you cannot achieve anything by just launching your own design or product and then say, okay, this is the perfect new option. So there's no other way than collaborating.
Okay, Thank you. I think this is also linked to some of the presentations we saw this morning, the concept of opening a dialogue, opening sometimes collisions. So thank you very much for that. So in the end, also design, it becomes key in every stage of product development. The creative and cultural industries are evolving very fast. Trends are evolving sometimes in unpredictable ways. And also consumer behavior is changing, sometimes accordingly and other times in different directions. So my question, which goes to Zoe and Piero, is the following. Are designing understanding and predicting consumer behaviors? And are consumers, on the other side, understanding and adopting the trends which the creative industries are bringing about?
I mean, I'm not interested in designers being influenced by customers. This is my opinion and what I teach and what I have lived all my life as a designer. I believe that design is a great privilege and a responsibility, and I think we have to not get caught up in capitalism, actually. I think we need to design new economic systems, not just be led into the ones that exist. I think it's complex. It's all about sustainable material, geography, culture, new canons of aesthetics. But that has to be interwoven with not just being, for me, it's just my take, listening to these trends about what customization wants, what customers, this fast speed. I think evidently we're all smart to see the speed of the culture that we all exist in is not healthy. So I think fashion is the second biggest polluter. For us to be led by that would be a disaster. And I think we have to remind ourselves how powerful it is to design our identity and where that's going to go, not just in the physical and the local and the very human, but where it will exist in the 0 or 1 and the digital. And so we have to design new economic systems. We have to design and look at the kind of ethics and the values around where that landscape is going to be.
Thank you.
And yes, sometimes designers might be a little bit ahead, maybe too much ahead, but it also means, I totally agree with what Zoe said, and I think also that what we really need is the patience also, not only to, of course, take things forward, but also we need to have the patience to keep on doing and keep on speaking. But sometimes the things, it takes time that they spread. And there might be even cycles, that sometimes a new idea comes and then it's forgotten and it comes back and then it really happens. But of course with this super urgent thing, this sustainability issues, it's definitely, well, I don't know if we can be ahead. We just have to do things now.
Okay, I think this also adds to the concept of scalability and are things possible, and so what is sustainable in terms also of time, which is what Nasia was saying this morning also with regards to, is this applicable today to a trend? It all depends on how much, what kind of pace you need for the innovation to occur in, so thank you for that. Now, usually when we talk about innovation, or most of the time when we think of the concept of innovation, it relates to technological innovation. So how is the use of technology influencing the creative industries? And again, what is the role or the relationship with customers with regards to this? Are they influencing the changes, or is technology influencing customers' behaviors? And I ask this to Manuela and to Wolfgang Wagner.
Maybe I start by telling that technology is not everything, although engineers very often think so. This is the start of innovation. Yes, we should have, as engineers, as technologists, we should have options to provide solutions. But the problems we should solve, or the challenges, that should be defined by customers, or in the best case, by designers, which think ahead of customers. Customers typically solve today's solutions. That's good. That's obviously a business and a business need. But designers could give answers to problems which will be there tomorrow, which is then future business. And the successful designers challenge the technologists to give them answers to these future problems. So I think that is the relation which I see, that of course looking at customer needs is always good, but to stay ahead would be even better.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also say always that artists are creating wonderful fictions. Designers are creating out of these fictions wonderful desires. And these, actually we need these desires. We need designers to define these desires that are then actually influencing consumers. So I think this is somehow very important.
Thank you. I like the idea of talking about fictions and desires, because the idea of changing what is desirable is actually, I think, what almost all of us are trying to do towards sustainability. Sustainability is something that is not only desirable but needed. So I think this is very, very interesting. But so we talked about artists imagining worlds, designers making worlds and making desires possible, technology facilitating this change, this shift. But is the market ready, or when do you think that the market will be ready for such projects? And I ask this to Julia and to Wolfgang. So when do you think the market would actually be ready for these changes?
So I can only speak to kind of the 3D printing and the fashion and whether the market is ready for it or not. I definitely see huge potential for the market to have this technology be integrated, because there's just so many things which can be changed in the fashion industry incorporating this technology, such as sending the digital file worldwide and having on-site production, working with recyclable plastic materials, reducing shipping costs, working in a sustainable way with biodegradable PLA material, mass customization by using 3D scanning of human bodies and then designing for that specific figure, and also personalization. So I think that definitely all these factors would be relevant. And I see a huge opportunity. With my personal label, I'm interested in pushing the 3D printing into more wearable pieces. So starting with like accessories and handbags and skirts and combining it with traditional materials as well. I think it's still because of costs, still in a more luxury sector. And, but maybe in 10 years we will see more mass production in it. Yeah.
Well, I totally agree with Julia and also with Wolfgang. I think the time will be ready when the solutions that can be solved with the technology will be better than the problems, the solutions that were solved before. Otherwise, it makes no sense. If the value is high enough, then there will be the new technologies kicking in on a larger scale. But in the end, I think it's not about the technologies. It's always about the value that is there for the customers. The customer might not care how a product is produced. If he cares about costs, then the costs are the thing. If it's sustainability, that we can solve the problems with better overall sustainability solutions, then it's this. So I think there's still a way to go, but I definitely see technologies coming and solving problems in a way better for us, for the entrepreneurs, for companies, but also for the sustainability environment. So I'm very positive, and I see the technologies definitely as opportunities and not as threats. You just have to be creative in using them in a way that helps.
Okay, thank you. I think also Julia touched a very important point, at least for me, which is now because of the costs. Of course, when we talk about technology applied to a certain type of innovation in the fashion industry, but it could be valid for any industry, is always in the luxury sector. And so when we talk about lifestyle sectors, are we talking about luxury sectors, or are we trying to talk about sustainable lifestyle in all sectors and not only top tiers. So how can designers, or how should maybe designers and technology providers facilitate this change, and not only in the luxury sector? And I asked this to Wolfgang and also Sebastian, who's also adding, I think, heritage, as we heard, long-term heritage, but also innovation today. So Wolfgang, what do you think?
Maybe I answer with an example which I heard out of another roundtable discussion, actually, where a very successful company was asked, how did they get there? And design was in the lead. And the lady told me that she put a challenge to the technology people to say, this has to work. And she was not satisfied with all the solutions she got as options. And finally, if they got the right answers, then this was turned into a product. So I think maybe it's also sometimes different, so vice versa. But I think what the lessons learned was it's the challenges. It's a collaboration by telling what you need and how it should be realized. And this needs to be discussed so that everyone is getting to a good compromise about it. But the good compromise should not be a weak one, but a creative one. So it's this collaboration aspect of different views of people. And I think that is the important point here. Innovation is not a technology thing, it's not a design thing alone, it's bringing good views of people together and making them then successful.
Yeah, I also wanted to answer this with an example. A few years ago, like 8 years ago, when we were really starting this brand and we were small, I came across one guy from Korea. And they are a very big manufacturer for materials for the electronic industry, like Samsung, Apple. And he showed me all these materials he also did for other fashion brands like Comme des Garçons. And he had one material which was completely different to all other materials. It was really tacky and changing the colors, but it was very stiff. And I asked him if we can have this material to do something with it. And he said it's not possible. We tried and not possible. And I said, okay, but if you don't have anybody doing something with this material, just give it to us, even if we are much smaller than your other customers, and I will promise you we will do something nice. So our idea was that we make a whole shoe out of this, while all his materials before were only used for little details. And we created this whole shoe, and we managed to achieve, and he was so proud of it, and we showed it in a very big show in Berlin at that time. And it was the first material and first shoe which is changing the colors and everything. So due to this, we sold a lot from this, of course. He was really happy that he presented this to all his customers, and suddenly people he already worked with, like Nike, after we got the exclusivity done, he also worked with Nike, and Nike, okay, they copied the shoe, but for us it didn't matter because we do something totally different. He made big business because of this, with this material, and since then his company grew a lot, our company grew a lot, and we got a lot of connections through his material which he developed to develop our brand. So at the end, there were 3 parties, one which we don't know, his party and our party, which all succeeded and all had a benefit from this collaboration. But it was his trust in us that we do something with this material.
Well, thank you. And I think trust, again, is a word which came up a lot of times today. It came out in the policies that both Sylvia and also Koen discussed this morning. So I think the idea of trust amongst people and trust in other disciplines is something which is very important, and in a way opens up a whole other question which is related to the social, environmental and ethical implications that come about such a strong change in behavior, but also in technology and in methodologies that can support a kind of innovation. So Manuela, you're the person who I'm directing the question directly to, but I would also like, considering what Zoe was saying before, if she feels like adding to this. So what are the social and environmental implications of this cultural shifts, let's say, and how can we go about implementing it in the right way?
Yeah, there was, maybe I share what we discussed yesterday evening also with Isabel and so on. I think we have to tell the stories. Yeah, we have to, we were staying together there. So we are so much, Isabel, this is the point from Isabel, this is not my point. Isabel is totally right in saying we are, in the fashion industry, we are so much focused on forms, on making designs, but somehow we forget in actually bringing the people to the front who are developing the fibers, who are developing the materials and so on. So actually, I think we have to tell the stories better, so the narrations should not only being built about the form of the, let's say, costume, it should go deeper, it should go into the material. And when we go into the material, we can tell the stories actually where the material is coming from, how it came together, how it has been developed, which kind of technological process is behind, and so on. I think these are all stories that have been told too. And I think this is something that, especially in my case, I mean, working for a cultural institution, this is something also that we can do beside the fashion or beside the textile industry. So I think a lot of different forces can work together in order to change a behavior that is maybe coming now from the fashion industry, but telling the stories also via other channels and yeah, raising consciousness about these issues.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess the side of it I'm talking about is the kind of algorithmic side and the data side that can, in the end, relate through potentially so the invisibility of it within a material. But I would just suggest that there's a great new book out. I've forgotten the lady's name, but it's called Surveillance Capitalism. It's a really beautiful book. It's not too dense. And then also Yaron Lanier, Who Owns the Future? And so I think we have to be just deeply aware. I feel kind of interestingly in a place in my life similar to when I was part of protest at the end of the century. And at the end of the century, no one really listened to that protest, and all that protest was environmentalists and really asking questions about our values. And as someone who has designed identity and clothing all their life, I feel that, yeah, we just have to be mindful about what, when we are stepping forward, where that technology is going to be rooted, who owns it. We're absolutely in a time of fake ownership, fake free. And I think we just have to be clever. We have to be smart and pertinent to our times and understand that there are systems that can create fantastic opportunities of imaginative roles. And again, I refer to, for me, where I'm interested in is that kind of role of our identity online, where there is no gravity, there's no biological gender. And so there's a phenomenal place for us to explore. Right now, that's also an incredibly dangerous space. So I think it's about reading and talking and debating. And it's key that we don't just get led forward by the kind of seduction of what it's all about.
Thank you very much. Now going more on the skills that are needed for the contemporary world, and I'm going to ask this to Piero and Assad as well. So, as design is changing, technology is changing. There's digital craftsmanship, emerging technologies, alternative materials, but also the whole concept of heritage and cultural diversity. And so identity today is something which is actually multifaceted. So my question is, what skills are needed in order to approach a design process in not necessarily the correct way, but the best way for the contemporary world looking into the future?
Well, I see that it is super important that you also know about the traditional skills, so that everything doesn't have to be reinvented. I mean, if you have in your team at least people who already know what has been done, maybe 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 5 years ago, then it's easier also to involve these new technologies on those topics. So I appreciate also the traditional skills a lot. But if I think of the kind of things that I think a designer should have is to enter to those collaborations. You should have curiosity, you should be open-minded. That's hard to educate, so you have to have that kind of mindset. When you enter to the collaborations, you need to have respect, not only trust, because to be able to build trust, you need to respect. And that's something I really, really emphasize. Respect what others are doing and saying. So it really helps. And then you need patience to let things to develop. And the third thing is the communication skills. Very often also we designers are very bad communicators. So then we are saying that nobody understands what we are doing or so, but we are really sometimes too bad on that. So that kind of skills are needed also in the future, more of them.
As an innovative artisan, I consider myself, I've always thought that machinery and technology would help me to shortcut the hard work, but not the finish and the ethical work. So for example, in a leather work, I would cut with the machine, and then I would take care of the piece, like with love, to sew it, to burnish it, and to finish it. So machinery and technology is very important in this process. But if I look at the future, for example, there are two versions of the future. The sci-fi version, where everyone is saying that wearables should be there to be able to survive. And the other side is maybe the other version would be maybe we won't have electricity to have these machines operating. So we are doing such a harm to the world. We should never forget the craftsmanship, to be able to go on and go back 100 years back and start from there, because we won't have the machines. So it's always a mix of both without forgetting the craftsmanship.
Okay, thank you. And so craftsmanship takes us back to heritage. And arts and heritage bring, their own values and are also very local, very national, but at the same time international as well. So the question goes to Kolbrun and Asad, but then anybody else who wants to join, and maybe also Pavel could join in. So how do you think arts and heritage and the values that they bring about can sort of counterweight either fast fashion or trends which are temporary trends?
I mean, fast fashion is always perceived as something that would die in 3 months, or even 1 month, or even in big companies and big brands in 2 weeks. So either you catch it or you don't. And it's always like against the concept of heritage, because when you talk fast fashion, it means you don't have time to be eco-conscious, because it's so quick and you can't just invest so much time in the process. So when you have an heritage piece, it speaks to itself. It has a spirit that a fast fashion piece doesn't have, a garment. So it connects with the humans. It's an automatic process. So heritage is safe as long as it respects the process.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to make it desirable to buy less. And how to do that is by being authentic and genuine. And like Manuela said, make stories out of your designs. Like, why do I want your design? Because it's authentic, it's something that has a meaning to me, and I need less because I have more,
Yes.
Yeah, I totally do agree with Kolbrun. It's about buying less, but better. And I actually believe that technology is opening completely new space for designers to consider in a better way what do we design and to who we design. So as the machinery is going to take, some part of the process, so we can consider better, in order to meet, what do we need? And to democratize the technology and so it can be delivered where it's needed.
Yes, buy less and buy better. I think it's an interesting concept, also if you relate it to storytelling. So it's going to be an interesting and I think long process to change the story and to change the perception of the story, especially in not necessarily younger generations, but generally speaking, I mean, now the story is actually be something, show something, change continuously. So buy less, but buy better means also taking slower time to analyze, and I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. What is the purpose and the functionality?
Exactly, and you think that technology could help this process?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, so moving from this into what is sustainable. We talked a lot about the meaning of words, communicating in the right way, being able to communicate. And so when we think of a sustainable product, the first thing that comes to mind, usually in the general public, and I put myself in the general public as well, is, okay, so I'm going to use biomaterial, or I'm going to use a single element that is sustainable, and that makes everything sustainable. So it's a lot more complex than this, of course. So the question to Nasai and Kendall as well is, what makes an idea, but more importantly, the implementation of an idea, fully sustainable in terms of social sustainability, environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, etc.?
Oh, such a tough question, because first I would ask everyone in this room to try and define what is sustainability and to qualify it in their context. I think that we are particularly talking about a crisis of consumption that is more prevalent in the West. So I invite you to consider what sustainability is here vis-a-vis the rest of the world. From the perspective of designing with biology, I think this is such an important question, because the first thing that we all should be asking when we're saying that the next bio-revolution is going to be fermented, well, fermentation eats a lot of sugar. And so where does that feedstock for these organisms come from? We're working on a project right now that is exploring alternative feedstocks that are not virgin sugar, and trying to find local solutions for feedstock. And so feedstock, if you think about it, it's just sugar. It could be corn that ferments the yeast so that they can produce PLA plastic, for example. That's how it's produced. But what if you live in a city and maybe you don't have a local farm to take waste product from to be able to fuel that fermentation process? You might say, well, we've got coffee in a city, tons of coffee, that's also sugar. How do we convert that into a fermentable sugar so that that becomes a feedstock? And so we do have to look at it less from a position of what is the inherent materiality that we are replacing a different product with. We also have to look at the system in which this is produced to try to find other layers to reinforce a more sustainable outcome.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've just said everything I wanted to say. Because I know a lot about biomaterials and say that. No, I suppose I actually wanted to start by saying what you began with, which is, I think, sustainability has been said quite a number of times so far in this discussion, but I don't think anyone's really gone about defining that in a certain way, and I'm glad that you brought up the kind of divisions of social, economic, and environmental sustainability, because I think most of us are talking about environmental sustainability in this context. I know when British Council internally talks about sustainability, we're usually talking about our own financial sustainability. So I think it's quite that definition is quite important in echoing what Natsai said. And I think if we were to approach it from an environmental perspective, I would probably say the most fully sustainable product or project you could create is nothing. That we shouldn't be making anything new. That we should be looking at what resources already exist and not drawing any more. But then that's probably not the most economically sustainable model. And I think equally, cultural and social sustainability, part of that is about decent work and livelihoods. So if we're not making anything new, then people might not have livelihoods. So I think equally something kind of fully sustainable would have to break apart, as Zoe said, the existing economic models and ensure that it's providing an alternative that maintains livelihoods, that maintains the environment, and keeps people going. But I think I don't think that would be possible without kind of global disruption and the end of the world or something really depressing. But I think from the perspective of designers, I would probably encourage people to think about all three of those aspects in their work, but also not just, again, similar to what Zoe said, not just think about a product, but think about systems and how we're designing new systems and new models to exist in.
Well, thank you. I've actually given a perfect lead to my next question. So thank you for introducing it. which is actually related to redesign and avoid waste. So how can we look into nature and biology from Natsai's perspective, but then anybody else who wants to jump in, and maybe Zoe would like to, or maybe also from more of a technological aspect. So how can we learn from nature and biology, and how can we learn from what has already happened in order to redesign our systems and avoid waste, whether it's waste of solutions because we are redesigning things which have already been designed, or we are designing in the same process and it's the process that's not functioning. So how do we learn, let's say, from what is happening around us and from what we have done in order to start redesigning the systems?
I think redesigning what has already been designed is incredibly important in nature. We've been evolving for 3.8 billion years, all of the life systems on this planet. It's a game of redesign, and redesign occupy a niche. So that's the first thing we can learn, is that constant adaptation is what has created all of the variables that we see in nature and all of the wonder that we see in nature. And so if you're talking about an organization, if it isn't redesigning what it does already, then it's setting itself up for failure in some respects, because it's not responding to the landscape around itself. But one image that stays with me forever when I think about what does nature do that we can learn from is, I don't know if you've seen David Attenborough's one of his programs where the elephant dies a natural death, and they have a stop animation of what happens to the carcass over a few weeks, and that's just an incredible lesson to see how systems in nature at different points in that process of decay kick in, and even when you think there's nothing left to be had there, you have organisms that are evolved into the system to repurpose until there is nothing there. And so for me, that is a metaphor for how we need to think differently, more generally, about all the systems we're building, how resilient are they, and what other platforms are we creating for other things to thrive off of that system. But also very simply, in nature, virtually nothing goes to waste.
Thank you. Zoe, would you like to add?
It was actually a talk that you gave, and it's just the idea that what fascinates me about bio and nature, and I think it's really important, is our relationship to the world we're in and how committed we are, understanding all the kind of stats that we get, but that I think you said that nature isn't perfect. And so what's really interesting about that for me, that's gone through my head over the last 3 or 4 years, being kind of more and more involved and closer to learning about bio and thinking about it, and having moved out of London as a city, living in a city for 30 years, and now I live in the middle of fields, is from a distance, a tree has a certain perfection. And then as you get closer, there's an imperfection. And then when you go down to the molecular level, there's this kind of mathematical quantum beauty. And I think when we run any bio in the fashion department, it's about kind of asking, well, we've kind of really controlled aesthetics for so long. And I mean, I'm like a really linear type designer, so I totally understand when, you know, control, that cleanness and that precision. But I'm interested in the relationship we have. If bio becomes something very powerful, how it will, we can't control that aesthetic and the beauty that we will gain from that, and how that will inform us differently. It will inform our imagination and our thinking. And it hasn't really got to that place yet, but yeah, this is a really interesting space for me, for us to learn from nature, a new aesthetic, a new learning that might inform us.
Thank you. Would you like to add something from a technical technology perspective, not technical, sorry, about language, you know?
Yeah, I think it's more really a kind of responsibility we have to take. And this is especially also true for the technology, is very often we are somehow fascinated what we can do, what we can build as product, we can integrate as functions and features, to think about what is happening at the end of the life cycle, and also to do the design, but also the development to handle this in a correct way is not the typical habit of an engineer, but we need to get it. We have to think also about the end of the life cycle and how to handle all the components. And as typically products get more complicated with more materials, with combinations of materials, this is really a very important aspect, and it takes time. And this is typically something people don't like in development projects, to take this time to make the product really good. They are, or everyone is fascinated by how fast can we get to the market, and to take the responsibility to take the time to work on also on these other aspects is not something given, but I think we have to learn it. It's our responsibility.
Well, thank you again. You're talking about time, and so the question now goes out to Natsai and to Kendall, which is, what is the value that a sustainable product gives to customers, given that the time of the conceptual design and of the production and of the product getting to the market might be different. But so what is the value? I wouldn't say the added value, but just what is the value of a sustainable product?
I have a very simple answer to that. I think better mental health is probably, if I'm being an existentialist for a moment, one of the most important aspects of the time that we're living in. And if I work backwards and say why, you know, this built-in obsolescence that we see in all of our products, you know, for me, a sustainable product is something that perhaps offers better value from that perspective, which is to say, what I'm about to buy is perhaps the only time I have to buy this thing, and so that means I don't have a wardrobe full of the same things that are not going to perform to the ability that I need them to in the long term. And perhaps what that starts to do in a cultural sense is create the conditions that we don't feel the need to consume so much. And this is linked to mental health in a big way, because I think so much of what is driving consumption is this need to have your identity materialized in this way. And so perhaps we can find new value systems outside of that are not associated with the act of consumption, but perhaps the act of building solidarity with communities all around the world otherwise. So that's my short and simple answer, is maybe we'll be happier people for not having this stuff.
I'm really glad that you said that. You're saying great things. It reminds me of the laundry arts, the slow fashion to save minds, and the kind of, the correlation between mental health and, you know, movements like slow fashion. I think kind of adding to that, I made a note here to myself, which was, I found it, the use of, like, you know, the words product and customer in this context, which I was on a panel discussion recently, and one of the panelists brought up, I think it was Livia Firth said, she challenged the idea of being called a consumer or a customer, because it puts you in a position where you are being defined only by your buying power and only as you know, someone that consumes. Whereas they proposed instead reclaiming the title of a citizen. And I think this fits quite well with what Natsai is saying, which is that, you know, by being a citizen instead and choosing, you know, active participation in society, you know, your choices, those conscious decisions, the products or things that you are involved in, whether it is, you know, a certain system or, you know, purchasing something, that you're making that decision of your own right and not just being seen as, you know, someone to make money off of, I suppose. And again, it fits quite well with that message of kind of mental health and, you know, I suppose value systems as well.
So actually, you answered my you know, upcoming question was, what are the values that citizens are looking into products, and how should these values be promoted? Again, we go back to the storytelling, we go back to the communication, but when it's something which really has to do with the, you know, with somebody's being, how do you promote that, whether it's a product or it's a service? Maybe Kendall, if you want to take up from that, and then whoever would like to intervene.
Transparency. I think, you know, I do a lot of work with, I'm glad that you mentioned Fashion Revolution, and I think that's, you know, the biggest message of their campaign is about creating transparency in the supply chain, and I think alongside that is the idea of care. We were talking last night about the idea of you know, culture of care, and I think for both the, you know, people involved in purchasing products or participating in that system, and the brands and producers themselves, I think, you know, having access to that information so that you can make your own decisions, and just, you know, having full transparency within that chain.
Okay, well, thank you. So, since we have talked about, you know, the role of people in this, so first consumers and customers, now for the rest of the conversation, I think I will call them citizens. And so, can sustainability, and my question goes out to Hassad, and then if somebody else would like to intervene as well, can sustainability be used, can it be used or should it be used as an essential marketing driver to position a brand, and what kind of impact should that have in terms of, for example, will people pay more for this? Should they pay more for it, or should a sustainable product be accessible?
I think the biggest fraud that we're living in now is big companies saying that we're eco-friendly. It's like a big marketing lie to sell more, to attract more customers. So real eco-friendly would be an equilibrium between not being a super activist of who did this, when he did it, what was his salary. It's too much information for me. So it's like the equilibrium between doing it right and advertising it with a nice storytelling and having the same argument. As a designer, if you want to do eco-friendly product, you have to have the same argument and not changing it. Like, defend this idea until the end, because if you think about it, 100 years back, everything was eco-friendly and everything was handmade. And it wasn't very expensive. It was like the regular price. Now, if you see a $1,000 garment, then automatically you perceive it as a luxury brand, even if it's not. So people think that a high price is luxury, and it's not the case. Luxury is well-made and handmade. So it's a misperception that we have now that we live in. And to be able to sell more eco-friendly and to introduce it to the market in a good way, the solution would be finding a way to have it in a regular price, to regulate this price. Because when you think of eco-friendly, it's always like about the research, how much time did it take, so the price would go higher directly.
I think that's very interesting. I don't know if maybe Sebastian, would you like to add something to this topic?
Well, for me, a sustainable product is only a product which is of quality. And it's a tool you can use now for marketing to say you're sustainable. Maybe it's a trend, but at the end, the main goal and also the reality in the future will be that the future generations, they will not accept a product as luxury if it's not sustainable at the same time. So now it's more like everybody thinks it's a new matter, but sustainability has always been a matter for certain companies or certain people. Like even the big corporate companies, everybody's blaming now. They're also thinking about sustainability for a long time, but then on the other hand, you have your shareholders and they only care for the margins. But I think there's almost no company which is thinking about sustainability for a long time. Now it's a trend, but for me it's more like a fashion trend, that it's cool right now to be sustainable and to be to do ecological things which don't have to be the same thing at the same time. If it's sustainable, doesn't mean it's ecological. But in the future, it will be just normal to have a sustainable product, at least in our Western regions or developed countries. You cannot expect an Indian person to be sustainable right now because they cannot afford to be sustainable. So right now, it's luxury to buy sustainable products and even to be able to buy sustainable products. If you live in India or Bangladesh, you're just happy to have something to eat and you cannot think about if it's vegan or biological or whatever. So I think now it can be a marketing tool, and it should maybe be a marketing tool to educate people which are not educated in this way, but in the future it will not be a selling USP, because in the future, normally, everything should be so much developed that it's sustainable.
Okay, then
I might add something. I think that the perception of sustainable now is that it will last forever, and it's not. I mean, another way to make it happen is imagining if you take a trendy jeans that would last for 1 year, and you pay $100 for that. You can also pay $100 for sustainable jeans that would last 1 year as well. So sustainable doesn't mean that it will last forever. So it's the way it is done. And this is a misperception that people doesn't have now.
I think there's a lot of perception because actually sustainability means that the product, it can go back into earth. If it lasts forever, then it's probably not sustainable because there's something wrong with the object, if we're talking about a physical object. So I think a lot of things can be said also compared to who can be sustainable, when, and how we talked about the Western societies. How can our Western societies part of the solution towards sustainability, or are they just shifting the issue somewhere else? And maybe, Natsa, you would like to add something to this?
Yes, I just wanted to respectfully challenge what you were saying about sustainability in an Indian context, for example. And it sort of comes back to my earlier remarks about defining sustainability here. So to want to eat vegan food and to aim for a luxury product because we've decided that luxury is the only way to be sustainable, and only understand sustainability from this lens is to ignore the economic realities of some other parts of the world that are just inherently sustainable because they live within very specified limitations already. In fact, limitations is not even the correct word. So perhaps limit is a better way of phrasing that, in the sense that what that person might be, how that person might be living is already sustainable because they aren't consuming at the level that we are here, for example, and that they probably already eat vegan food because that is their diet. And so when we are trying to find new pathways, alternative pathways to live more sustainable lives, there's actually a lot to be learned by how other people are living in this world, and that perhaps actually what we're doing is an emulation of what they already do.
Well, thank you very much. Now we could talk about sustainability, of course, and I think for a much longer time, but I do have to also keep the time schedule a bit tight. So let's go back to the role of the designer, and I'm asking this to Pavel specifically. What can designers do to help shift behavior towards sustainability?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, sorry. What can designers do to help not only design sustainable products or processes, but to change the behavior of citizens and of designers and of the industry towards sustainability?
Well, I believe that true innovation is something, with a human input, something with some kind of soul inbuilt into it, something that touches you emotionally. So it's again about the holistic approach and about the communication and continuity and social responsibility at the same time. And going back to what we were talking about before, is, if you're able to pay more for a product, so you're investing. So it's good to be aware, what do you invest to? Where does the money go? What do you support?
I would like to add something
of
to
course.
This. I think that another thing what a designer can do is to just say that sustainability is a given. The product I'm producing, it has to be sustainable today. It's not something we talk about for the future. I think we all have to produce sustainable by today. And I think that as a designer, you can contribute that sustainable doesn't equally mean that the product needs to look like sustainable. You can, with your design and innovation, you can innovate on that and create, especially, I would say, with additive manufacturing, you can have so many opportunities in terms of geometry because you have no limitations. You can design anything and 3D print anything because there are no limitations to the geometry. And it's also a technology which only uses as much material as needed. When I was working with Ross Lovegrove in London, he would always talk about fat-free design. So only working with that much material you actually need, and then not only thinking about the life of the material, but how can you eventually reuse the material? So can you melt it down and make your new clothing out of it? So I think we're talking a lot about fashion, but I think there were also some projects in terms of architecture. And in building design, we're always trying to build, to have the buildings last as long as possible, while I actually think we need to think about how can we build to use the architecture in different ways from 20 years from today, because our typologies of buildings might change over the period of time. So I think it's not only about the material and manufacturing of today, but also how do we reuse those things in the future? What does happen to a dress which lasts for 20 years, right? Is it going to be reworn, or is it going to be melted down and reprinted with a new innovative design in the future?
Well, thank you very much. So let's go a bit into academia, because in the end, a lot of the people on stage are either involved directly in academia or in cultural events which support, let's say, new generations in getting the skills. But so, is academia fully aware of this change, and more importantly, equipped to support this change, and supporting by providing the skills, but also in fostering knowledge exchange with other cultures, with other disciplines, with different heritage. And I ask this to Pirio, Zoe, and also Pavel.
Right. Well, I think that the question is, you know, how do we create in the age of overproduction? You know, this is a new challenge for academia, for designers, you know, in general. It's the new approach into creation itself.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear what you said. Just, can I go back and then go forward? So I just think what you said was very interesting, because we're in the very beautiful building, but I felt for a long while that architecture and fashion should swap practices. That architecture should only make things that you can disappear within a second, and fashion need to build dresses that last for 20 to 30 years. In fact, I think if we, again, begin to change our systems about how we approach things, could be interesting. Is academia ready? I think, yeah. I think there's lots of great universities across the world who've been kind of leading on this. For me, it's not necessarily academia. I think it's schools. It's about the people who come in and the staff who when you kind of face, you have to be very live. You can no longer be kind of stuck in something you prepared last year. I think it's just very important. I really believe in live thinking and making sure that we're all learning from each other and kind of very connected. And that means connecting not just within the bubble of what your program is or what your school is. It's trying to be very human in the local and very connected in the global, and really be as curious as possible. We have such great privilege. We just have to use that, and that means, yeah, just checking yourself constantly, that you don't get stuck down something you thought was appropriate or correct or sounded good, and not being afraid to be challenged by the students. At the same time, yeah, you're there to support. I think sometimes, particularly around fashion, they really want to be involved in it, but they just spiral because they don't see ways of where they can go forward. So I think it's also about learning again, what are the new systems? Because I feel deeply questioning and guilty, actually. I see the students go out to the world where the system hasn't really changed. So we have the most amazing 2 days with phenomenal intelligence and brilliance in this room. But not for nothing, the system is the same. So we have quite a big challenge ahead of us, and we have to be alert and sharp.
Yeah, I think if academia is ready, not all are ready. We have so many challenges, so many things to do. Some institutions are doing well, and they are well aware, and they are able to educate and react, but some not. So it's really a big change happening now, and of course it takes also a little bit time. If I think not only education, but also the other side of kind of a research and the academic side of that, so that's also also has an important part, kind of a looking beyond the trends and trying to make sense and trying to understand what is really, where are the numbers, what is what. So also the research part of the academia is super important to really try to preach and prove and understand and make sense. And then, of course, we need to educate. So people who can, in the future, also to give voice to the future and help us, everyone, to imagine where we are going and what can be done and what not. But then also this research side. And for that we need this collaboration definitely a lot with research institutes as well around the globe.
Well, I think I'm going to steal what you said, is working beyond the trends and looking into the sense and purpose of what we do, which I think in a way sums up what has been said today. One final question to then, I don't know if we have time, so just one final question to Julia and Wolfgang, which is, how is the creation process changed and influenced by digitization? You've already answered it partially, but if you can just sum it up for us.
Well, I think that the creation process is very different from traditional making in fashion, I would say, because in the digital process you design everything within the computer and you design it in 3 dimensions, so there's no more the way of making cutting patterns or designing in 2D and then thinking how to bring it back into 3D. It's all, I would call it digital craftsmanship, because you kind of work digitally. So one thing what is a huge topic in this sense is ownership. And I loved how you said before fake ownership, because I think it's different when you design something in the computer. It can be replicated many different times. So the question rises, who owns the digital file? And if you then reproduce it as a 3D print and the 3D print is being sold, still who owns then the 3D print, or who can reproduce it? So I think in that sense there might be a shift in working with the digital environment and in the digital creation. And then of course another one is everything has to be designed before, can't be adapted afterwards, so it just has to fit once it's out of the machine. And the other one is how to combine it with traditional methods, so that maybe is something which leads to your answer.
Yeah, and I would go one step further. Also, the next generation, where a lot of buzzwords are hanging around, like artificial intelligence or machine learning and stuff like that, but that's going to be reality. We see that. I mean, today we had some very exciting projects. For instance, the Este project, where algorithm helps to make something very individual or to translate it into an object, where the production is no longer the problem due to additive manufacturing, but the creation of the design itself can be automated or at least added by people. Not entirely automated either. But it helps, and it's a tool, yeah? And it will change how things will be created, and it will enable things that cannot be imagined so far. And if you saw Julia's presentation and what she did with algorithms and the translation into form, I mean, that's just the beginning.
Well, thank you. I could stay here hours, but I know we have a tight schedule and we also have another speaker. So I want to thank you for keeping up with me and not keeping up, but bearing with me and letting me ask you so many questions and sometimes trying to tweak a little bit and provoke. So thank you very much. It's been extremely insightful speaking to you. And thank you, and hopefully we'll have time for individual questions afterwards, also with the people in the audience. So thank you very much. Okay for your glasses? I think we're going to do a very quick removal of the chairs, and then the floor is all yours. I think we need them for the questions. Yeah, I think so, yeah? Okay. Am I using this to introduce him? Okay, so this is active? Okay, so I don't think they're gonna take, would it be okay with you if they don't take the chairs off or not? Yeah. They're not taking the chairs off. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you. Okay. Okay, so if this is on. Hello. Okay, so we're ready now for our next speaker, Joop Pamen, and he has, aside from being a partner and founder of Flow Design Works, he has an extensive international experience in human-centered approach to innovation, so not the technological aspects, but not only, let's say, the technological aspects. He has more than 50 successful projects, and what is extremely interesting in his international perspective is that he has been in very diverse cultural contexts. So for us, it's going to be extremely interesting to see how can we leverage on design thinking to promote and implement human-centered innovation. So Joop, thank you so much. The floor is all yours.
My pleasure. Thank you. If I understand correctly, I'm the only thing standing between you and the sun outside. So I will try to keep it exciting, and I'll stay within the time. If I go over time, just start waving and I'll disappear. So, who has already heard of design thinking? Can you just show me your hands if you have? Okay. Who has actually practiced design thinking? So actually, okay. I see a couple of people. Are there any people that are expert in design thinking in the room? All very, we have one. Okay, so I will ask you, if I say anything that you disagree with, just raise your hand, just intervene. Feel free to correct me, okay? So, just because we don't know each other, I've been fortunate enough to work on a lot of design thinking type projects, over 100, in many places around the world, which has the advantage of showing that design thinking is quite a universal approach. It works in China, works in Costa Rica, works in Spain, so I would definitely encourage you to at least try it. And this is where... Okay, what would I like to cover with you today? I'll give you a brief explanation of what design thinking is in my mind. Let me know if you disagree. Why design thinking is interesting, why I think design thinking is interesting, how we apply design thinking, and maybe you will see some ideas on how you can do it as well. And then the last section is about how you can make it happen. If after the first 3 sections you're still interested, the last section will tell you how you can make it happen. Okay, Tim Brown, CEO of IDEO. IDEO more or less invented design thinking, if there is ever such a thing as invention. But what he says is that design thinking, and all the words are important here, human-centered. Remember the discussion that was there during the full session here about are we customers, are we users, are we citizens? We solved the issue by saying it's human-centered. It's an approach to innovation. And basically, why is it called design thinking? Because we draw from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So it is, by its very nature, a very hybrid approach to solving problems. A simple way to think about it is we look at what's desirable from a human perspective, we look at what's viable from a business perspective, and we look at what is feasible from a technology perspective. Given that we're looking at all these things at the same time, it's highly unlikely that you can do this as an individual. So by its very nature, it's very much a collaborative effort and very much a cross-functional effort. Why did I put the cover of the Harvard Business Review on this slide? Because that also gives you an indication that by now it is kind of an installed way of approaching things. 4 important elements. As we said, human-centered. You start from a deep understanding of what customers need. It's co-designed, so you work together. It's experimental. And this is actually one of the areas which is very hard for many of my clients to accept, that you just experiment. It's not an obvious thing. And then you learn. If design thinking is about anything, it is about learning. Not learning in an academic context because you want to become smarter, but learning because you want your solutions to become better over time. Maybe a little bit of background about design thinking. If you look at the way we used to work in the business world, MBAs, etc., it was a very rational approach, very analytical approach. Only analysis will get us there. Then you had a big swing to say, no, we have to be creative. If you want to be innovative, you absolutely have to be creative. And so you're all about creativity being the answer. So it's much more focused on synthesis than on analysis. So why not combine both? It's not an either-or story. You try and combine both within design thinking. It is not a silver bullet. I'm not here to sell some kind of miracle cure. It's a very interesting approach. You can do a lot of things with it. Will it get you to the answers all the time? Not necessarily. So why? Why are we looking at design thinking? In part because when you are involved in designing solutions, addressing problems, at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we are humans working for humans. We don't solve this for some kind of machine somewhere. So the human element is always the central piece. And so if there is one boss, even within a big company, it's the customer. or the user, or the citizen, whatever you want to call it. The context obviously has made that you need new approaches. Things are moving much faster. It's like a roller coaster ride. You have increasing expectations. We are much more connected than we have ever been. The British people would like to disagree and pretend that they can do Brexit, but we are, despite everything, very much connected. And there is increasingly intelligence everywhere. So this new context means that you need a new approach to solving problems. And before, you could afford to have what is called a waterfall system. So you did the analysis, you did the design, you went into development, and then you went into implementation. That's still the way it is taught in many places. But that's not the way it works now. The way it works is that you try and frame the problem as well as you can. You have an ideation phase. You make something, which is your initial, best solution, and then you know that there will be an evolution. Everything evolves. So you go from a framework which seeks static perfection, which nobody ever achieves, to something which is much more dynamic and goes for permanent progression. So, all of this is nice and good, but how do we do this? We like to think about 3 key elements. You look for a solution fit. Obviously, you have to find a solution that fixes a problem, and a worthwhile problem, preferably. You also look for market fit, because if you have a fantastic solution, but you can't sell it, nobody wants to buy it. May be interesting, but it's not going to get you there. And you have to be able to make it. Again, that's quite a big challenge to do those 3 things at the same time, but most of you are probably used to this. And so you get big debates in innovation circles. Some people say that innovation is all about new technology, and then people start talking about Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, neural networks, etc., etc. That's all well and good. Other people will say, no, it's all about the user. So you have to understand what's called the jobs to be done. What does the user need? What does the user want to do? You have other people that will say, no, creativity is the answer. Go for creativity. And you have other people, yet again, who will say, no, it's all about operational excellence. Well, it's probably all of these things. You just have to be able to combine them. And again, it's the reason why the individual designer will probably not help you get there. I have nothing against individual designers, let's be clear, but humankind has progressed through collaboration. Individuals have never achieved anything. They've always had to work together. Even when you give an Oscar to the best actor, the guy wouldn't be there if it wasn't a whole team putting together the film. If the rest of the film was lousy, you would never have noticed his Oscar-winning performance. So, if you want the kind of sophisticated scheme about how we approach things, this is how we go about it. There's really 3 big phases. You have to have an intent. You have to know this is what we would like to solve. This is the direction we want to go in. It may not be right. It may turn out to be wrong. But at least you have to initially say, this is where we want to go. And you have to align on this within your team. You have to agree on this. This is actually a problem in many teams, that from the start, they don't really agree. And that's usually a guarantee for failure at the end. Then you have a development phase, and increasingly important, you have an evolution phase. From the start, you have to assume that there will be evolution. Within the development phase, we do exploration, we do ideation, we do prototyping. All of these things should be familiar to you from the design space. But then also in execution and evolving, we keep this human-centered focus. And throughout, we look at problem fit, market fit, and execution fit. Looks very complicated. It's actually quite simple to do, but you have to keep the focus. Up. The first thing you have to do is get out of the building. I heard during the roundtable discussion one person saying, we shouldn't be following these customers, we shouldn't let people dictate us what we should do, etc., etc. She is absolutely right. You shouldn't let people tell you what you should do, but you should be looking at people, and you should be looking at what they're doing. You should be looking at